It's interesting how the same message can resonate with us differently depending on our current life circumstances. Take, for example, how hearing the message, you have to work out to stay healthy, hits you differently at different decades of your life. In our 20s, we work out to look good. And as we age, we continue to work out to stay mobile and then prevent injury. Motion is the lotion, our PTs tell us. This morning's gospel message takes on a similar character. We have heard this gospel message throughout our Christian lives, much like the invitation to work out to stay healthy. It is core to what it means to follow Christ. It is the new commandment to love one another as we have been loved by Christ himself. Jesus said, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another." As we mature in faith, we can attest to that. It is easier said than done. What seems like an overly simplistic commandment can be more difficult when the rubber hits the road. It is incredible to think about how the church has lived into this commandment or failed to do so throughout the centuries. And it's fascinating to think about how we here at St. Thomas Church have lived out this commandment through the decades, dating back to our humble beginning in a Medina boathouse in 1943. And it's also interesting to think about how this message lands differently depending on when we hear it in the church calendar. It is the same message, but it is set to a different key depending on the time of year. The last time we heard this message was during Holy Week on Maundy, Thursday. Set within the context of Maundy, Thursday, these words sounded tender, solemn, intimate, set in a minor key. Recall with me Maundy, Thursday, which is the enactment of the story in which the new commandment was first given. Jesus, knowing that he and his death, his time among us, was drawing near, that he was about to be betrayed by Judas, denied by Peter, tried and crucified, sat down with his friends for the Last Supper. And during the course of the meal, he offered this commandment as his last will and testament. Like so many deathbed conversations, Jesus cuts to the chase and tells his disciples what matters most. Over this meal, he tells them that in order to truly follow him, they must love one another with the same love that he has loved them with. He explains that to truly be a Christ follower, they must love one another with a selfless and unconditional love, an agape love that seeks the good of others without expecting anything in return, a love that seeks to serve others as though they were Christ himself. And to ensure that the conversation didn't turn into an esoteric discussion, he immediately shows them what this type of love looked like in action. Recall with me what he does next. He goes and gets a towel, gets down on his knees, and washes his disciples, his friends' feet. He explained to them, and especially to Peter, that they needed to be washed in his love so that they could be set free and go and love others with the same type of love. Today, on the fifth Sunday of Easter, we hear this same message again. Set in the middle of the 50 days of Easter, a season marked by Jesus' triumphant resurrection that makes all things new, as our reading from Revelation puts it, this message, this invitation to love, sounds a bit different. It sounds joyful, confident. It reads more like a commission than an invitation. Go out 2 by 2 and proclaim the risen Lord by loving one another, by washing one another's feet, literally or figuratively. In a season when we recall that because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, he has made all things new, when we have been gifted the promise of the new Jerusalem, where death will be no more, mourning and crying and pain will be no more, when we proclaim that God's kingdom is being born among us right here and right now, we hear the same message in a different light. And in today's second reading, we see Peter living out this new commandment as though it were his commission. In his mission in Joppa, Peter had a vision about eating unclean meat. And he came to realize that this was God's message to him, that God's salvation, God's love, extended far beyond the boundaries and conventions that Peter assumed. Peter's mindset needed to be resurrected to see God's love in his here and now. And so Peter had a dream. And this dream showed him he was to go out and include the Gentiles, you and me. And it wasn't long after Jesus was resurrected that he went to go and visit Peter. Do you remember this? Just a few weeks ago, we recalled this conversation when Peter and Jesus were talking, and Jesus asked Peter 3 times to undo the 3 denials. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And what does Peter say? Yes, Lord, you know I do. Yes, Lord, you know I do. And Jesus responds with this commission. Well, then go and feed my sheep. And so Peter, anchored in his love for Jesus, begins feeding Jesus' sheep, many of who in Joppa, that to his surprise, were included in God's plan for salvation. For Peter, like for any Christian, this meant loving people through a posture of washing their feet, with a servant-hearted love that saw them as Christ himself, not looking at status, wealth, nationality, political affiliation, or whether they were considered insiders or outsiders. Peter, like the disciples, like Christians who sat in these pews almost 75 years ago, were invited to go and do the same, to love people with this agape love that looks and smells like foot washing. Agape love is selfless, unconditional, that seeks the good of others without expecting anything in return. It's a love that is born out of a deep love for God that extends friendship to the stranger, to one another, and that invites in others to the same union with God through outward sacrificial acts of love. And to really understand this type of love, to really understand what it feels like and looks like, we have to understand the spirituality of foot washing. Foot washing that invites us to this deeper understanding of what it looks like to love someone in humility and mutual vulnerability. Because to wash someone's feet is to take on a posture of service, but also of tenderness. It is meant to meet one another in our shared humanity and fragility. It calls us to set aside power, status, politics, and pride. It reminds us that love begins when we're willing to serve, when we're willing to humble ourselves in a kneeling posture, and that we're not only called to serve, but to allow ourselves to be served, to receive this love from another in that same posture of humility in which it was offered. This kind of love is not abstract, but embodied. It's rooted in the dignity of every human being. And just like foot washing, loving other people with agape love is messy and sometimes stinky because we're dealing with the complexities and cracks, the calluses of the human condition. And it doesn't always look pretty and manicured. Just this past week, we saw an example of this kind of agape love lived out in the public life of the Episcopal Church. It's been all over the news. And I've received emails from parishioners from our parish, beloved children of God, who both agree and disagree with the Episcopal Church's decision. For those of you who have not heard yet, the Episcopal Church made the bold decision to refuse to settle white South Africans, Afrikaans, and to stop accepting federal funding for our Episcopal migration ministries. This came after long prayer and deliberation. This came months after the executive order of February 7th, 2025, to withdraw all U.S. government aid to South Africa because of the claim that white South Africans were being persecuted under the Expropriation Act 13 of 2024. While we don't have time to go into the nuances of the history, anybody who has spent time in South Africa, as I have, I was ordained by a Black South African bishop alongside a white Episcopal bishop. Anyone who has spent time in South Africa and has traveled around can see, much like when you go to the Southeast, the vestiges of racism, and in this case of apartheid. In response to the executive order, white Christian pastors, and it's important that I name that these are white Christian pastors and leaders, published a statement. They said this: as white South Africans in active leadership within the Christian community, representing diverse political and theological perspectives, we unanimously reject these claims that somehow the white South Africans were being persecuted. Going on to say that stopping this support, the U.S. aid, disproportionately affects the HIV community and many other vulnerable people. Now, at this point in the sermon, I think some people are feeling like I'm bringing politics into the pulpit. And that's you. I just want to take a pause and let you take a big, deep breath. Beloved, we have journeyed together for 2.5 years. I will only mention things in the news when they clash with our gospel values, with our call to love one another. The Episcopal Church's decision to refuse to fast-track white South Africans was not to say that they are not beloved children of God, but it was to say that it is not okay to fast-track others and to allow certain members of the human family to skip the line while other members of the human family have been waiting and are in much more dangerous positions. In his public letter, presiding Bishop Sean Rowe wrote, "We cannot participate in a government program that advances a policy of discrimination. The Episcopal Church stands for the dignity of every human being." And note, the dignity of every human being is in our baptismal covenant. It's a vow that we all take and renew every time we witness someone's baptism and we remember our own. He goes on to say that this means all people, regardless of race, nationality, or status, must be considered. Beloved, this is foot washing. This is the church kneeling down and refusing to compromise the gospel for the sake of money and power. This is hard and it's costly, but it's more costly if we don't. And this decision of the presiding bishop and EMM did not go unnoticed. The Archbishop of Cape Town expressed his gratitude to the Episcopal Church by saying this: "Thank you for refusing to be complicit in a policy that devalues African lives. Your stance is a prophetic witness and a sign of solidarity with the voiceless, the displaced, and the vulnerable. It tells the world that Christ's love knows no borders." That, beloved, is what agape love looks like. That is the gospel commandment lived out. It is messy, stinky, cracks, calluses, warts, and all, but it is sacred. So yes, this message we've heard countless times, love one another as I have loved you, hits differently this morning. This is not politics. This is preserving the church's soul, as one said. Not just as a sentimental reminder, but a bold commission, a call to embody the risen Christ by the way of love, not in theory, but in practice, with towels in hands and knees on the ground. So let us go out and love the Lord by loving the person we see in front of us. Let us go love them with this agape love by humbling ourselves and being their servants. For this is how the world will know that we are Christians, by our love, by our love. Amen.